afternoon to you all. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this talk sponsored by our Center for Christian Jewish Learning and the Theology Department here at Boston College. I'm extremely pleased to welcome Dr. Ido Koch, who is an associate professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University. He is a co-director of the Tel Hadid Archaeological Project in Israel. He is co-director of the White Levy-funded project for the final publication of the archaeological researches of a very famous Israeli archaeologist, Yochanan Acharoni, at Tel Arad. Professor Koch is also the co-director of the Swiss-Israeli project on stamp seals from the Southern Levant, some of which we'll be able to see today. And he is the editor-in-chief of the journal Tel Aviv, journal of the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University. And as a result, I'm also familiar with his skills as an editor, and a harsh one occasionally when one submits an essay to that journal. So for students who are worried about criticisms, I take them also, Professor Koch is a prolific scholar and has published widely in numerous fields in the ancient Near East and ancient Israelite and archaeology studies. Some of his most recent works include 3 monographs, one in 2018 called The Shadow of Egypt, Colonial Encounters in Southwestern Canaan during the Late Bronze and the Early Iron Age. A second and more recent monograph in 2021 is called Colonial Encounters in Southwestern Canaan during the Late Bronze Age and the Early Iron Age, published by Brill Press. In 2022, he edited a volume of the journal Hebrew Bible in Ancient Israel called Mass Deportations to and from the Levant during the Age of the Empires. And some of my students have already read papers from that book. He's written well over 50 refereed articles, and so I'm not going to go through a list of those for you today, but to give you a sense of some of them that touch on biblical topics, in 2020, he wrote an article called On Philistines and Early Israelite Kings in a volume called Saul, Benjamin, and the Emergence of the Monarchy in Israel. In 2022, he wrote an article called A Framework for the Study of Deportations to and from the Levant during the Age of Empires, on a topic concerning colonialism, colonial deportations, and the experiences of Israelites and Judahites under the great empires. So it's my extreme pleasure to welcome today to Boston College Professor Koch, who will deliver his lecture, Images of Gods and Goddesses in the Kingdom of Israel, a Southern Levantine context. Professor Koch.
So, good evening, everyone, and I would like to thank David for the very kind introduction and for the invitation to speak in front of you today. And I would like also to thank the Theology Department and the Center for Christian Jewish Learning for this very warm hospitality. So thank you very much. So as David said, my name is Ido Koch. I teach archaeology at Tel Aviv University. And my research focuses on visual cultures, craft, and interregional connections of the ancient Southern Levant, mostly during the 2nd and 1st millennia BCE. In this kind of introduction, David mentioned the 3 projects I'm involved in. I should not move them. One is Tel Hadid that I have the pleasure to co-direct together with colleagues from the States, mostly New Orleans, a site with 4,000 years of history. I'm also serving as co-director of the final publication of the Tel Arad project, a fortress, mostly known for a fortress from the time of the kingdom of Judah, so the first half of the first millennium BCE, that is mostly known for a temple and an archive that were found there. But more crucial for my talk today, I lead as co-director the project Stem Cells from the Southern Levant. Our project is aiming to publish all stem cells found in the Southern Levant, that is the states of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, from the Stone Age, from the 7th millennium BCE, all the way to the Roman period, that is the 1st millennium BCE. And it is this deep dive into the world of the ancient seals and their imagery that has led me to the topic of my talk today: images of gods and goddesses in the Kingdom of Israel. Since time immemorial, humans have sought to capture the divine in visual form. Across cultures and eras, deities have been depicted in various ways. Anthropomorphic figures imbued with human-like qualities, zoomorphic representations embodying the power of animals, floral motifs evoking the life-giving forces of nature, and celestial symbols reflecting the awe-inspiring grandeur of the cosmos. These divine images, whether engraved on vessels and jewelry, woven into amulets, or sculpted into figurines and statues, offer us precious glimpse into the rich tapestry of human religious expression. In this talk, I would like to delve into the fascinating world of divine imagery in the Kingdom of Israel during the biblical period. The Kingdom of Israel was situated in the Southern Levant, encompassing regions that are nowadays parts of Israel, Jordan, Palestine, and also parts of Lebanon. The more precise time frame is the 10th to the 8th centuries BCE. The upper chronological anchor is the accepted date for the emergence of the kingdom, while the lower is the end of the kingdom being destroyed by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Before beginning, there is a word of caution. While we often use terms like Israelite to describe people and artifacts of this period, we must be careful not to impose modern assumptions or biblicized interpretations onto the archaeological evidence. The complexities of the past demand a nuanced approach, one that acknowledges the diversity of cultures and beliefs that existed within the ancient Southern Levant. To illustrate this diversity, my talk will focus on 3 object categories: a cult stand, stem cells, and a single item, a rectangular plaque that was found only a couple of years ago. These artifacts, representing different categories of objects and originating from distinct ecological niches within the Kingdom of Israel, offer a window into the rich tapestry of visual representations of the divine in this ancient land. Our main stop is a site called Tel Ta'anach, an ancient site north of modern-day Jenin in the West Bank, at the southern edge of the Jezreel Valley. Excavations directed by Paul Lapp have unearthed a treasure trove of cultic vessels dating to the 9th century BC. One, and probably the most famous, is a stand made of clay, measuring a little less than 2 feet, with a shallow basin on its top. Its function was likely related to the warming of liquids placed within the basin, perhaps through the use of fire contained within the stand itself. To truly grasp the impact of this vessel, imagine a small, dimly lit room filled with the fragrant aroma of the warmed liquids, while the flickering flames casting dancing shadows through the stand's fenestrated windows. A closer examination reveals that the stand is adorned with distinct registers, each presenting a symmetrical scene. So let us embark on a visual journey from bottom to top, carefully analyzing these captivating depictions. The bottommost scene presents the image of a naked female anthropomorphic figure, grasping the ears of two lions, or more likely, lionesses. The figure's nakedness, coupled with her command over the powerful felines, strongly suggests that we are in the presence of a goddess. This association of a goddess with lions or lionesses has deep roots, stretching back centuries in the Southern Levant and across swaths of Southwest Asia and Egypt. While most renowned pairing is that of Ishtar, a Mesopotamian goddess known since the 3rd millennium BCE, other goddesses were also linked with these majestic creatures. The underlying narrative behind these associations might have been a myth, recounting the goddess's triumph over the lion, perhaps during a primordial phase of creation, imposing order over chaos. Ascending to the second register, we encounter two winged sphinxes flanking an empty space. The sphinx originated in Egypt, where it served as a powerful symbol associated with the king. Composed of a leonine body and a human head, the sphinx embodied the ruler's domination over the world. By the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE, the sphinx had migrated northeastward to the Levant and beyond, undergoing two significant transformations in the process. First, it was typically depicted with wings, unlike what acquiring a celestial dimension. Second, it evolved into an apotropaic symbol, believed to safeguard sacred beings and spaces. Such depictions were common during the 1st millennium as well, including in the court of Samaria. Now, this is the place to note that scholars have long ago suggested that the Sphinx is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible in the term cherub. Another common convention placed sphinxes guarding corridors or entrances to palaces and temples, preventing evil forces, from penetrating these sacred realms. Returning to the Tanakh cult stand, how are we to interpret the empty space between the sphinxes? Do they guard an entrance to a divine realm, or could the void itself represent an invisible deity? This latter interpretation draws upon the scholarly association of the Sphinx with the biblical cherubim. Based on the presumed cherubim throne that existed within the Temple of Jerusalem and the phenomenon of empty Sphinx thrones known from Phoenicia, scholars suggested that the second register in the Tanakh cult stand also depicts, or doesn't depict, an invisible deity. Our ascent continues to the 3rd register, where we encounter another pair of lionesses, this time flanking two horned animals positioned on either side of a tree. Trees have held profound sacred significance in the Levant since time immemorial, as evidenced by pictorial representations, enduring memories, and traditions embedded in written sources, most notably the Hebrew Bible, with its references to sacred trees and groves. Even today, in modern day Israel, there are sacred trees that are sacred trees revered by Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Druze. Their sanctity stems from their long life, their connection to the earth, significant event that transpired in their vicinity, or the burial of holy individuals beneath their shade. In the Southern Levant, the tree mostly depicted was the palm tree, a resilient species that thrive even in the arid conditions, reaching towering heights, and its offshoots emerging from its base close to the ground. As for the horned animals raised in the register, their coupling with trees is well attested since the 2nd millennium BCE, as seen in association with both goddesses to your left-hand side and gods on the right-hand side. With the advent of the Iron Age, the pairing of the tree and the ibexes retain its prominence, as can be seen in the enigmatic site of Kuntilet Ajrud. This was a trade station in northeastern Sinai that was in the service of the Kingdom of Israel. The most common horned animal that we find in these depictions is the ibex, a wild goat renowned for its agility and resilience in the rugged terrain of the Levant. It emerged as a potent symbol of human adaptation. As a side note, I have to confess that I fell in love with ibexes when I saw them during COVID. Actually, I saw them through TV, but during COVID, with the lockdown, streets were empty and ibexes came to the desert towns of Israel and started to control the streets until humans got back. Also, a side note, the zoo in Tel Aviv tried 5 times to have ibexes and they ran away time after time, the only species you cannot hold in a zoo. So in order to demonstrate why I so like ibexes, I would like us to watch a short video and then we'll talk about them further. Because indeed, the ibexes can defeat gravity. They can climb cliffs of almost 180 angle degree. They can run away from their hunters, and they did until firearms arrived to the Levant and they were completely extinct by the local population. The ibexes now in Israel are originally from Africa, and they were brought back to nature a few decades ago. So they can scale impossible cliffs, and they can endure harsh conditions. They are big animals, by the way. And those guys, the males, have long horns, and during time that before mating, they start to fight. And then you hear like thunder-like sounds across the desert. All of that might have triggered the imagination of people that saw them, that cherished them and appreciate them. And indeed, since the 5th millennium BCE, ibexes appear in visual language of the Southern Levant as a sacred animal. Now, again, I like ibexes. And when I went to visit a colleague of mine who digs in the far south of Israel in a site called Timna, known for being one of the more important ancient copper mines of the region, I saw that scene of the ibexes climbing atop the tree and eating from its top. So this image of the ibexes eating from the tree is really an existing scene that was embedded within the religious visual language of the Southern Levant. So following the goddess, naked goddess with her lionesses, and the enigmatic empty space between the sphinxes, we encounter a third way to represent the divine, this time as a life-sustaining sacred tree nourishing the ibexes. Whether this depiction signifies a god or a goddess remains open to interpretation. Finally, we reach the 4th and uppermost register, where 2 griffins, I hope you can see one of them on the right-hand side, are flanking a pair of pillars, and between which stands an animal with a disc hovering above its back. Emerging from the disc are linear incisions, which we will talk, or I will talk, and you have to listen in just a bit. But first, let us talk about the griffins. Similar to the sphinxes, they have a lion's body, but an eagle's head. And similar to the sphinxes, when they arrived in the Levant, they acquired wings, and also they assume a apotropaic role, safeguarding sacred entities. The griffins flank or protect an animal that is likely a calf. Calves, or more commonly bulls, have been associated with deities since the Stone Age. The most frequent associations are with the moon god and the storm god, while in the Southern Levant it was mainly the storm god. The connection with the storm god likely arose from the life-giving rain that nourishes the fertile soil, enabling the bull to plow the land and ensure a bountiful harvest. In some instances, the bull, likely, like the lion I mentioned earlier, appears alone, probably representing the deity itself. As for the disk hovering above the calf, based on parallels, it is probably representing a winged sun disk. An icon, once again, of Egyptian origin that back then was associated with the sun god and by extension with the king. Similar to the Sphinx, this symbol also migrated to the Levant and Southwest Asia, undergoing a transformation in this process. It evolved into a symbol of celestial beings, particularly supreme deities, as exemplified in the depictions of the storm god to the right, and even Ashur, the supreme god of the Assyrian Empire, to the left. During the same time, which is the 9th century BCE, the winged disk was probably embraced also by the court in Jerusalem. Coming from a 9th century context in Jerusalem is this clay ceiling. So it's not a seal, but what was used to seal the document or a container. And it is depicting a winged disk on a pole alongside a throne, a composition that has been interpreted as reflecting its association with the supreme deity, most probably Yahweh. It might that already at this stage the winged disk was adopted as a royal emblem of the Jerusalemite court. The better known representation is the seals that were used to mark storage jars as belonging to the court. So it's not only the storage jars, but also the wine or oil that were contained within the storage jars. But a more decisive item is a bulla stamped by the seal of King Hezekiah of Judah that features a winged disk and an ant, the symbol of life in Egyptian hieroglyphs. So to conclude this part, the 9th century cult stand from Tanakh represents 4 distinct ways of envisioning the divine, or probably 5. The naked goddess with her lionesses, sphinxes flanking an empty space, the sacred tree nourishing the ibexes, and the calf beneath the sun disk. These motifs, all rooted in 2nd millennium BCE traditions, attest to the enduring power of these ancient symbols in the 1st millennium kingdom of Israel. However, it's important to note that the cult stand from Tanakh provide one of the last known glimpses of the naked goddess in the Southern Levant, unlike the continuity of this image in the Northern Levant and other parts of Southwest Asia. This may suggest a shift in the worship of this image, perhaps reflecting changing cultural norms or evolving conception of the divine. This shift invites us to consider how other forms of the divine may have emerged and evolved during this period in ancient Israel, which will be the subject of the next section. Can I take it with me? Or it has to be? Okay. So the images adorning the Tanakh cult stand offer a fascinating glimpse into the visual world of ancient Israelite religion, or religions. But cult stands were not the only medium through which Israelites expressed their beliefs. A variety of artifacts, each associated with different aspects of religious life, provide a rich tapestry of parallels to the imagery seen on the Tanakh cult stand. In the coming minutes, I would like to explore 2 motifs and their context. The bottommost, which is the deity and their animals, and the uppermost, the winged sun disk. This is a good chance for me to remark that in the Southern Levant, where the kingdoms of Israel and Judah and other kingdoms existed, the most common of these media were stem seals. These small carved objects, often made of stone or faience, served a multitude of purposes in the ancient society. They were used to mark ownership, to authenticate documents and symbolize authority. They were also used as amulets, embedded in charm practices. By studying these seals, researchers can unlock valuable information about ancient production techniques, trade networks, and most importantly for our talk today, the iconography that reflects the beliefs and values of the people who use them. All of the animals and hybrid beings featured on the Tanakh stand also appear on these seals, suggesting their significance within a broader symbolic repertoire in ancient Israel. One of the most common scenes resembles the lower register of the stand, where the goddess is holding the two lionesses. Known in scholarship as the master of animals, the scene depicts an anthropomorphic figure holding the animal or animals by their forelegs, necks, or other body parts. Attested across Asia, Europe, and Africa, the master of animal was known in the Southern Levant since the second millennium, when goddesses were depicted holding horned animals or birds, sometimes even standing atop lions. During the early first millennium, the held animals were crocodiles and scorpions, probably reflecting Egyptian influence. And during the 10th century BCE, they were joined by my beloved ibexes, as you can see on the right-hand side. But the 10th century also saw a new addition to the pictorial repertoire of the Kingdom of Israel and the Southern Levant, the ostrich. This powerful bird, native to the desert regions, was a relative newcomer to the artistic traditions of the Levant. Alongside the master of ostriches, there were other scenes, all indicating adoration and sacredness of this bird. The ostrich itself represents a unique set of characteristics that captured, most probably, the imagination of the ancient Levantine people. Its imposing size, sometimes up to 9 feet tall, making it the tallest animal in the region, combined with its exceptional speed of up to 43 miles per hour, made it a really serious creature. Its powerful legs, capable of delivering fatal kicks, further enhanced this image as a creature demanding respect. Moreover, the male ostrich, distinctive mating behavior with a loud roar, reddened neck, and elaborated dance likely added to the mystique. These features, combined with its ability to thrive in the harsh desert environment, may have led to the ostrich being seen as a symbol of power, resilience, and perhaps even divine attribute. The eminent scholar Edith Porada even suggested that the weird-looking ostrich might have been considered a hybrid creature, as might be understood from its depiction in similar compositions like the Sphinx and the Griffin. Now, ostriches have been depicted in the region for millennia, but mostly in the desert, deep in the desert. Their appearances on seals and other artifacts became common only during the 10th and the 9th centuries BCE. This increased appearance has been explained by scholars as reflecting the emergence of a new belief system, perhaps even related to the rise of Yahweh, that the ostrich was a divine attribute of Yahweh. The origin of the ostrich iconography in the southern steppes of the Southern Levant has been connected with the assumed origin of Yahweh from the southern deserts, as reflected in theophanies in the Hebrew Bible, such as Deuteronomy 33, Judges 5, and Habakkuk 3. Recently, this proposed origin of Yahweh from the southern desert has been a matter of debate. yet the appearance of the ostrich can hardly be disconnected from the desert fringe. I've argued elsewhere that the popularity of the ostrich figure likely reflects the growing interaction between the settled lands to the north and the arid regions to the south, possibly due to the increased trade and specifically the booming copper industry in the Arabah Desert. So these are marked by, yes, it's white on white, so I hope you can see it, but the two white circles at the bottom, Feinan and Timna, were producing copper in large scale, and this is where possibly there were contacts between the people from the north and the desert-dwelling people that were familiar with this bird. So to conclude this part, the Tanakh cult stand and stem seals provide valuable insights into the animal attributes associated with deities in the Southern Levantine religions, specifically the ancient Israelite. Both feature the master of animal motive, where a figure grasps animal, highlighting its significance. Interestingly, the 10th century BC saw the rise of the ostrich as a prominent symbol, likely reflecting increased contacts between settled communities and the desert, perhaps fueled by the copper trade. This introduced the ostrich, representing power and resilience, into Israelite religious imagery. However, this motif disappeared in the 8th century when a new set of symbols was introduced. And this leads to the last part of this talk. Let us look again at the winged disc at the upper part of the Tanakh cult stand. As I mentioned earlier, this is an Egyptian icon that was adopted and translated by the Southern Levantine people. This process of cultural exchange also included other symbols like the Sphinx, the griffin, and additional Egyptian icons that were incorporated into the visual language of the region. This phenomenon reached another peak during the 8th century BCE, a time when the Kingdom of Israel reached its zenith, while, interestingly, Egypt was quite in a decline. These symbols underwent another fascinating process of translation and adaptation in the Southern Levant, demonstrating the enduring importance of the Egyptian influence over the region, even when Egypt was in decline. This cultural exchange exemplifies the complex relationship between Egypt and the Southern Levant, highlighting the enduring impact of Egyptian iconography on the region. The sun disk was depicted during the 8th century along another symbol, and this was the beetle. This coupling is similar to the convention known from Egypt for millennia. There, the beetle was depicted since the 3rd millennium BCE alongside the sun, envisioned as a celestial scarab protecting the sun from evil forces during the nightly journey beneath Earth. This divine association and protective symbolism made the beetle a popular motif also in 8th century Israel and Judah. A collection of 9 bullae from Samaria attests to the importance in the Israelite court, while its use in the administrative system of Judah alongside the winged disc suggests a similar significance in the Judahite royal context. Now, the problem is that while scholars have elaborated on the meaning of the sun disk, the meaning of the beetle remains a puzzle. Clearly, it cannot represent a supreme deity in the Southern Levant. And please remember that the Southern Levantine people didn't have this cultural connotation like in Egypt of the meaning of this beetle over millennia. So it seems that a probable direction for the solution, or a possible solution, is a remarkable plaque found a couple of years ago at a place called Chatzor in northern Israel, in a context dated to the 8th century BC. This tiny object, well, not really tiny, about 2 inches long, opens a window onto a dramatic narrative that echoes across millennia. The plaque's base is engraved with a scene of an anthropomorphic hero locked in a battle with a fearsome 7-headed serpent, a motif that resonates with ancient myth from across Southwest Asia. Now, hold this miniature masterpiece in your mind's eye. The hero confronts the monstrous serpent, wielding a spear in his raised hand and gripping the creature's neck or necks with the other hand. Notice the details, the carefully referred muscles, the elaborated garment with the fringe edges, the determined expression on the hero's face. Even the serpent's scales and coils are meticulously carved, conveying a sense of motion and struggle. Adding to the intrigue are 3 creatures that stand witness to this epic clash. Our beetle, to the left, a griffin with its eagle head, and a winged cobra snake. These creatures, each imbued with symbolic significance, accompany the hero and hint at the cosmic nature of the struggle. Please recall the griffin we encountered on the Ta'anak cult stand, flanking the pillars and the calf. Here, the griffin appears to support the hero, its presence adding another layer of symbolic meaning. And it seems that the beetle here is in a similar role, accompanying the hero rather than representing it. The third hybrid up there is a winged cobra that adds another dimension. Known as the ureus, the cobra often depicted without wings in Egypt, where it was a popular protective, apotropaic symbol, famously adorning the foreheads of pharaohs. In the 8th century Israel and Judah, the ureus is typically depicted with wings. And again, we see how Egyptian symbols were transformed to become celestial. Sometimes you see 4 wings, a local convention that amplified its protective power. Moreover, the ureus may even appear in the Old Testament, identified as the saraf, mentioned in contexts such as Isaiah 6, and thus it further adds to the divine association. This scene likely represents a battle for order against chaos, a struggle between forces of good and evil, with the hero ultimately establishing divine authority over the forces that threaten creation. While the motif of the hero battling a serpent appears in the Southern Levant during the 2nd millennium BCE, it seemingly disappears by the end of the 2nd millennium, and it is not attested during the 1st millennium. This absence allegedly means there was a break in the visual tradition that persisted for centuries. And so the discovery of this plaque from Hatzor changes our understanding, providing evidence for the continuity of this motif into the 1st millennium BCE. Indeed, the roots of this motif lie deep in the remote past, stretching back centuries before the Kingdom of Israel. We find its earliest pictorial representation in Mesopotamia, dating back to the mid-3rd millennium BCE. Later Mesopotamian texts elaborate on the theme. This motif also appears in written sources from Ugarit, an ancient city on the Syrian coast. In the Ugaritic Baal cycle, the goddess Anat claims her victory over the 7-headed monster Tunan, which may be related to another monster called Litan, thus suggesting a link between the traditions and the potential for these fearsome creatures to represent different aspects of chaos. Echoes of this ancient motif surface in the Old Testament as well, demonstrating the shared context of these Southwest Asian societies. There, Yahweh is depicted as a divine warrior, battling against the sea, often associated with primeval chaos. the dragon, and the Leviathan. These texts allude to Yahweh's triumph over these multi-headed sea monsters, drawing parallels with Ugaritic traditions while suggesting a complex chain of transmission that likely involve both written texts and visual representations. This plaque from Hatzor underscores the crucial role that images play in reconstructing the religious landscape of ancient Israel. These visual representations offer a unique perspective, complementing and sometimes even challenging the narratives we find in the textual sources. This brings me to the intriguing case of Heracles and the Hydra. In his publication of the Hatzor item, Christoph Uhlinger from Zurich points out that the scene of Heracles battling the multi-headed Hydra, commonly depicted in Greek art, appears to have its prototype in the imagery from the ancient Near East. The problem was that the sources are known from the second millennium, while the Heracles depictions are from the second half of the first millennium, so there was a gap. The Hatzor seal, dating to the 8th century BCE, thus provides a crucial link in understanding the transmission of the motif, falling chronologically between the second millennium representations and the later Greek depictions. So yes, while the exact channels of transmissions remain unclear, it is likely that this imagery traveled along the trade routes and cultural exchanges that connected the Levant and the Aegean. This connection highlights the interconnectedness of ancient cultures and the enduring power of visual motifs to transcend geographical and temporal boundaries. The Hatzor seal, therefore, serves as a valuable piece of the puzzle in tracing the long journey of this ancient motif, reminding us that the stories and symbols of ancient Israel were not isolated, but rather part of a broader network of cultural exchange and shared narratives that span the ancient Mediterranean. And so, to conclude my talk, I would like us to reflect on this exploration of divine imagery in the Kingdom of Israel during the 10th to the 8th centuries BCE. By drawing a range of archaeological evidence, we have illuminated the diverse ways in which the ancient Israelites visualized and interacted with their deities. Through the analysis of three classes of artifacts, the Kalsten from Ta'anak, stem seal amulets, and the rectangular plaque from Hatzor, a complex tapestry of religious expressions have been uncovered, shaped by both continuity and innovation. I would like to suggest several key takeaways. First, the enduring power of tradition. Many of the images encountered on the stand and the amulets, such as the naked goddess, the lion, the ibex, have deep roots in ancient Southwest Asia, demonstrating the lasting influence of these traditions on Israelite religion. Second is adaptation and transformation. Even as these traditions were maintained, they were also adapted and transformed to fit the unique cultural and political landscape of Iron Age Israel. The incorporation of the ostrich, a relatively newcomer to the visual repertoire, demonstrates this adaptability, and highlights the growing interaction between different ecological niches within ancient Israel. The rise of Egyptian iconography and its localization with the winged disc, the cobras, and the scarabs exemplify this dynamic process even further. Lastly is the visual and textual evidence. The identification of hybrid creatures like the winged ureus and the sphinx in both visual and textual sources emphasizes the interplay between these two forms of evidence. The Hatzor seal, with the depiction of the hero battling the seven-headed serpent, further demonstrates the importance of considering both visual and textual evidence when reconstructing ancient Israelite religion. Ultimately, this exploration of divine imagery reminds us that religious expression is not static, but rather a dynamic, evolving process. The artifacts examined here offer a precious glimpse into the diverse way in which ancient Israelites visualized and interacted with the divine, invited us to appreciate the complexity and richness of their religious world. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ido. Dr. Koch has agreed to take questions, especially hoping to hear from students at Boston College who might be taking core courses on the Bible now, or other topics related to theology. So if something struck your fancy or interest, we invite you to ask questions, and I will hope that he will have interesting answers for you. So feel free. And Camille Fitzpatrick-Markey will come around with the microphone if anyone does have a question. And so there's one here.
I'm not a student and really not very knowledgeable in this, but in my readings in Hebrew literature, I don't recall any mention of an ostrich. And I'm wondering about the prevalence of the visual image without a written, at least as far as I know, a written counterpart, and what you make of that?
Thank you for this comment. The ostrich is a big enigma, especially since it might be that the word referring what we think ostrich in the Hebrew Bible is not really referring to an ostrich, but to a kind of an owl. So we are with almost no information about this importance of the image of this bird in the Southern Levant, probably by people that never saw an ostrich in their life. We are going to publish in the coming month, I hope, another fragment of a cult stand from another site close to Ta'anak that has the depiction of an ostrich on it, made in clay. So it's the first depiction of ostriches not on stem cells. So it was part of the religious landscape during the 9th century BCE. We simply don't know why. I mean, I tried to argue why, but we don't know the context and the association with what deity that can be suggested. I have to say, I'm not really against the association with Yahweh, but simply there is no way to assess it. Thank you.
Just one moment.
When do we stop seeing images of God or goddesses in history?
Once upon a time, there was an assumption that during the Persian period, so after the exile and the so-called return to Zion, there were no images anymore in Judah. Well, there were images. Actually, there was an idea that during the 7th century BCE, because of the so-called image ban that is understood from the Pentateuch, then there were also an avoidance of images in Jerusalem and Judah. The fact is that we can identify images in almost every house that has been excavated from Jerusalem or Judah during the 7th century, just before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. And then there was an assumption that there were no images from the next period, which is after the exile and the return to Zion, but there are images. There are images until late in Judaism. If you visit synagogues from the Roman Byzantine periods in the northern part of Israel, in the Galilee, there are beautiful zodiacs in these synagogues. There are images even of what could be Helios, the sun god, on his chariot, in a synagogue. So the avoidance from images is probably, and I'm referring to other scholars, it's not my specialty, don't kill me if I'm wrong, the influence of Islam over Judaism. In Islam, there was a complete avoidance, has been, and probably this is the main impact that was adopted by Jews about the end of the first millennium CE. So quite late. Please, but I think, yes.
So I was interested in when you were mentioning how the Sphinx was represented in the Hebrew Bible as cherub. Was that correct? I was wondering, does that word cherub really mean Sphinx, like in a literal sense of the language, or how did you make that connection?
I need the help of a Hebrew Bible scholars here. It's not me, I have to say it's decades old, this assumption. This connection, I'm not sure about the etymology of cherub.
Sorry, yeah, the translation of kruv, cherub, is not a little angel who's a putti in Renaissance art, but goes back to shared Semitic terminology, and we have it in more than one language, and also in later Semitic languages, indicating that it's a kind of hybrid creature, and given the placing of it next to the Ark of the Covenant, or above the Ark of the Covenant, with its wings touching or close to touching, and the Ark beneath, the logic of what the kruv cherub represents is a kind of winged animal, and they're also depicted in other contexts in the Hebrew Bible, suggesting that they're these kinds of what the Germans referred to as Mischwesen, a kind of animal hybrid creature, but they always have wings. And so the translation as Sphinx would be anachronistic, using a Greek term, but the kruv is best simply left, in a sense, untranslated. Just call it a cherub. That's the English equivalent of the Hebrew kruv, and it is a winged beast. Whether it looked like the Giza Sphinx is a slightly different story. But yes, the answer is yes, it's the actual Sphinx-like creature.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. Please.
I wanted to ask about, you mentioned trees very shortly, and I wanted to know more about how they were seen as sacred throughout the Southern Lebanon.
Could you please repeat the first part of the question? I didn't hear.
Trees.
Trees.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, in other surrounding cultures, were they also seen as sacred as well, and what significance did it hold?
So sadly, in Israel nowadays, there are almost no ancient trees because most of them, and the great ones, were cut down during the late 19th century when everybody was into steam engines and stuff like that. So sadly, there are almost no ancient trees. There are, I want to say, 60 sites of sacred trees that go back like centuries. And this is the fascinating part. You can see how they are sacred to both Jews and Christians, or even Christian Jews and Muslims and Druze at the same site. I'm trying to organize my thought. The thing is that trees, like all plants, emerge from the ground. So they are highly connected to ground. And in anthropological studies, they understood from different traditions, different narratives across the world, the idea that everybody emerged from the ground, from earth. So trees are somehow still connected, and they stand against time, they grow tall, they can nourish you, they can provide you shadow in these very arid, dry, not fun summers in the Southern Levant. And combined with other issues, for example, stories or people that were buried next to it, you find it embedded in so many religious contexts in the Southern Levant and beyond. I think one of the most fascinating things for me to see in churches in Germany, how there are still, do you remember how to call these trees in front?
Alterbaum? Yeah.
Outside of the building.
Oh, outside.
Yeah, not inside, yes. I'll Google it and I'll find it and send it to David. trees attract our attention because they are there, and I will not open the slides of the other lecture I have about the site that we are digging. There is one olive tree that is about 400 years old. Everybody that comes and visits us stands in front of the tree and admires it because of the size. They are impressive. They are strong. They sustain you. They provide you shade. All of this association made trees so valuable in the Southern Levant, beyond not only the Southern Levant. I hope it was an answer to your question. You should get a caution warning before talks of guests. Some of us are jet lags, so line of thought will not necessarily be coherent. So sorry that you were the victim for this not coherent line of thought. Was it an answer to your question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. You want the mic?
I think students might be interested also in some of the identities of the gods and goddesses. And I know that's very hard to establish, so I'm not going to press you to say which god or which goddess. But I would be interested if you could help us understand on the low level of the Tanakh cult stand, the bottom one of the naked anthropomorphic figure holding the ears of the lionesses. Can you explain for students how scholars recognize that female figure as a goddess, not as a woman or a queen or something like that?
Sure, thank you for the question. So let's start with late second millennium BCE, the two objects that I showed earlier. On the left-hand side, you have probably one of the earliest long inscriptions in alphabetic script. Sorry if I'm wrong. And the important thing is that it mentions a gift of kind of donation to the temple dedicated to a goddess, and her name is this here. We don't know how she looked like. There are no images of her with the title, with the name, but at least we know her name from this jug found in a temple from the 13th century BC. Her name was Elat, which is goddess in Semitic. This guy has no inscription. There is no label. But he was identified as Baal, the storm god of Canaan, by the attributes. So either you have the name or you have some hints to identify this figure, and here, because of parallels to other depictions of this figure, a scholar, professor from the Hebrew University suggested this is the figure of Baal. So you do either one. Either you have a name or you identify based on the parallels. But when we are facing such a depiction, even this one, we can identify the figure as a goddess because she stands atop of a lion. And mortals they can try, but I guess it's not that easy to stand atop of a lion. And here we are left only with the fact that she's holding the lionesses by the ears, and she is naked. I will not go too deep into how scholars use to identify naked goddesses or naked female figures in the past. Luckily, things are much more calm now, and the naked goddess is identified as a supreme goddess of its pantheon. And this is based again on the parallel, the attributes, and the fact that we almost don't have images of naked women from that period. And when there is this naked goddess or naked figure, it's because she is so powerful and not necessarily, and hence naked and not nude in a way. We cannot identify the name, but based again on the parallels, we can start to think who might she was. And then you have this kind of images. This is a stone stele from Egypt, from the early 12th century, late 13th century BCE. And the interesting thing is that this goddess is called the Holy One in Egyptian, which is actually from Canaanite, Kadeshet, a Holy One in feminine. So again, we don't have the identification of this goddess, but we have the name that she was known in Egypt. But then we go to Iron Age, early Iron Age, Southern Levant, and we simply have no names at all. And the goddesses of the Southern Levant during the Iron Age were identified with mainly 3 names. There is Asherah, Astarte, and Anat. And we simply don't have a clue on who she was. Again, the only references we can rely on are names of people. So most people had name combined with theophoric element. So we have goddesses mentioned, mostly Anat is known from the Iron Age. I hope it was an answer. Okay, good. Please.
I might just not be understanding the timeline fully, but if we have these archaeological depictions of gods and goddesses stretching like into the Babylonian exile, how come it's not showing up in like the written records? I don't know if that makes sense, but.
You mean in the Old Testament?
Mm-hmm.
So there are these guys telling you all bad guys don't worship goddesses and gods that are not Yahweh. It's there. And there is a great debate in scholarship. Asherah is mentioned, mostly in a plural form, in the Old Testament, but there is a disagreement whether it is a goddess or an artifact associated with the worship of Yahweh. I was in a conference in Germany last month, and I spoke with a professor there, and he explained why he thinks this is an artifact. When I spoke about it back with my doctorate father, my teacher from Tel Aviv, he was completely upset that this has to be a goddess. So the name is mentioned. The question is how to deal with it, what is the meaning of the name in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament. I'm not sure more than that. There is a reference to the worship of the Queen of Heaven during the late monarchic period. Do I miss any reference to goddesses beside Asherim or Asherah and the Queen of Heaven?
Yeah, and the Astartes, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Astarte, yeah. So there are mentions there are mention of worshiping goddesses, and that's usually then frowned upon by biblical writers. So our tendency is to see those persons who would observe such or acknowledge such goddesses as somehow apostasy, conducting a kind of apostasy. It's not okay but as Professor Koch shows, it's quite ubiquitous. It's quite common in people's households and on their personal adornments and so forth. So it's definitely present even in written evidence, but not approvingly.
A follow-up is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are images in almost every house from the late monarchic period in Judah. They are mostly figurines, clay figurines depicting a woman. And called pillar figurine, or it depends on the scholar. The thing is that there is a big question whether this is a goddess or an ancestor, or it has a different role in the religious life, of domestic religious life. So there are images, but it's very difficult for us to identify and to know what it represents and how to associate that with the written sources.
Similar to Dr. Vanderhoof's, Professor Vanderhoof's question, on the second tier of the invisible deity or God, could there be a possibility that that empty space could have been such like a lost structure? And if it's not, how do we distinguish what sort of deity it is? Maybe it's a God, and how is it related to the others?
So over here?
Yes, yes.
So this is, I wanted to present both options because I don't know how to decide, and everyone should think their own opinion on that. The argument that there is an entrance to a more sacred part of the temple is valid, but also the fact that there are invisible deities. I should mention that I showed this throne from the Persian period, so 5th century temple in southern Lebanon on the coast south of and north of Sidon. We don't know whether there was a statue on it that simply did not survive. So we have these thrones. However, an iconic worship was common in the southern Levant, especially in the southern part, in the desert fringe, and it's attested in multiple occasions. I mentioned the site that I'm publishing. There is the excavation from there during the 60s, 1960s, where there was a temple, and the most holy, the sacred focal point was a standing stone. This was the object of worship. So there was no image, there was a stone. Spoiler, we think there are remains of paint on the stone, and we are going to scan it with multispectral imaging in order to find out. But it's a stone. There is no image, there are no eyes, nose, mouth. So this was the object that was worshipped. So the possibility that there are invisible deities back then is plausible. But it's up to everyone here to decide what they would like it to be. This is the place where archaeology cannot, this is the spot where we cannot provide a definite, there are no definite answers, but provide an answer.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Is there one more question that we might want to conclude with? Otherwise, please join me again in thanking Professor Koch for his lecture.